Hi everyone, it's Yushin and welcome back to another polymer clay tutorial. In this video, I'll be showing you all the supplies, all the materials that I find really handy to have when making polymer clay. I also included alternative materials, so you should be able to decide what you're going to need or what you're going to get at the end of this video. I will also add timestamps for this video, so you should be able to fast forward to the section that you're looking for. Starting with clay. Out of all the clays that I've had access to, Sculpey Premo, Fimo Soft, and Craft Smart by Michael are great to use when making earrings. So any thin pieces is great to use with these clay. These clays are soft enough to use right out the bag, so you don't need a lot of conditioning. And if you bake them correctly at the right temperature, they should come out really bendy and really strong. You don't have to worry about it being too brittle. And my favorite one is Craft Smart because this clay doesn't require a long baking time. It only asks you to bake for 15 minutes per 6mm thickness, whereas Fimo and Sculpey asks you to bake for 30 minutes. The only color that I don't like about Craft Smart is their black, because their black is not a true black. It's more like a grayish black. And this clay is my favorite clay for sculpting because it's really soft and easy to work with, and I really like the color of this clay after baking. And next we have the surface that you're going to work on. My favorite and most recommended one is definitely a ceramic tile. It's a really cheap material, and you can also bake your clay on ceramic tiles. So you can work on your ceramic tile and then also bake your clay on these tiles. You don't have to remove them when baking. You could also work on acrylic boards, but you will need to remove your clay from the acrylic board when baking. Clay will stick to these surfaces, which is nice when you're cutting your clay with a cutter, because your clay will be sticking to your work surface instead of your cutter. If you don't want your clay to be sticking to your work surface, then you could use some parchment paper. And next we have this tool called a clay extruder. It is also used for sugar paste. It comes with different shaped discs. It is a really handy tool and it is really easy to use. This is definitely one of my favorite tools. It is also really satisfying just seeing how the clay is coming out. And next we have cornstarch. Cornstarch is a great way to make your clay less sticky. If you apply it to your hands, your clay won't be sticking to your hands, so there will be less fingerprints. If you apply it to any cookie cutter or any mold, your clay will not be sticking to your cookie cutter or mold. And next tool is a pastel machine. Pastel machine is a really handy tool to use when you're making a slab. It can also be used as a conditioning tool or a tool to remove the bubble in your clay. But make sure you're putting your clay in the right direction when you're trying to remove bubbles. Make sure that the folded side is facing down so that the bubble gets pushed out. The handle for my pastel machine came in really loose, so I attached a little rubber glove to make it more tight. If you don't have a pastel machine and you want to make a slab, for example, here I'm making a slab that has the same thickness as my ceramic tiles. So I will just be using 2 pieces of ceramic tiles as a divider, and then I will just roll my clay in between. You could use some business card, some playing card, or some cardboard paper as the divider, and then you can easily adjust the thickness by adjusting the number of cards that you're using. And then we have sculpting tools. The type of sculpting tool that you want to get is often based on what you want to make, so make sure you do a little bit of research before you go out and buy a bunch. And the next tool we have is some blades. So these blades are really handy to use when you're removing your polymer clay from any work surface. And next we have cutters. The cutter that I have are cutters for cookie and cutters for sugar paste. You could also get cutters specifically made for polymer clay, but they are a little bit more expensive than cookie cutters. You could also use polymer clay with silicone molds. Most of my mold are molds made specifically for resin but I use them for my polymer clay and it works great. I have a video on how you can make the perfect cast with polymer clay and silicone molds, and I will put the link to that video in my description. You can also make your own silicone mold with some silicone rubber using your own polymer clay creations. I have a video showing you the process of doing that, which I will also put a link to in the description. And next we have plastic wrap. Plastic wrap is a great tool when you're cutting your polymer clay with cookie cutters. It makes it a really clean and smooth cut. I have a comparison here. So the one that is cut with a plastic wrap is more rounded, and the one that is cut with only a cutter is more like a really sharp cut. It really depends on which one you like more. And see how the clay is sticking to the ceramic tile? You will need a blade to remove that. And next tool we have is alcohol and some Q-tip. Alcohol melts polymer clay, so if you have any dust or any fingerprints, you can use some alcohol to remove that. Make sure you're not using too much alcohol, because too much alcohol will cause your polymer clay to crack. And if you don't want to remove any dust, you only want to smooth out your clay, then you should consider using liquid clay instead of alcohol. Next, we have printing paper. When you're baking your polymer clay, if you bake directly on a shiny surface like ceramic tile, then the back of your clay will have shiny spot on it. Whereas if you bake it on a printing paper, it will be perfectly matte. And if you have clay that is too soft, you can also put it in between a printing paper, and the printing paper will make your clay less soft. And next we have liquid clay. Liquid clay can be used to attach different pieces of polymer clay together. You can attach baked pieces to baked pieces. You can attach unbaked pieces to baked pieces. You could also attach unbaked pieces to unbaked pieces. If you don't use liquid clay, then the connection between two parts will be really weak and it could fall apart. As I mentioned before, liquid clay can also be used to smooth out any clay. Liquid clay can also be mixed into your clay to make your clay softer. When smoothing out the surface of your clay, you can also use a silicone pen. And next we have a mini oven. You could get an oven specifically for your polymer clay so that you're not baking your clay in the oven that you're baking your food in. And the next section will be about coloring and varnishes. Chalk pastel is really nice to use when you are applying color to unbaked polymer clay. And you can apply your color as powder, so apply it dry, or you can add some water into your powder and then apply it wet. And I've learned this technique from an Instagram polymer clay artist, and here is her name on the top right corner. When applying the color, you can either use paintbrush or you can use some makeup brush. You can also add pastel powder into your polymer clay to get a new polymer clay color. You can also mix acrylic paint, resin ink, watercolor ink, or even watercolor with your polymer clay to get a new color. You can also use mica powder. It's like a shiny powder. And I made these textiles for my powder. And you would also apply the powder when the clay is unbaked. They look great if you apply it on the surface of your clay instead of mixing it in with your clay, because by mixing it in, the color is less visible. And the next coloring method is using acrylic paint. So I've tried many different brands and they all work pretty well. When you are first starting, you can either get a set of colors or you can just get the primary colors and also white and black, so that you can pretty much mix any color with the colors you have. And another coloring tool is acrylic pen. Acrylic pen are really easy to use when you are coloring solid colors. Like for my rings that I'm wearing right now are all colored using acrylic pen, because the tip of the pen is hard, so it is a lot easier to control than soft brushes. And another coloring option would be watercolor ink. Watercolor paint also works, but you would have to seal them differently from sealing other mediums. And after painting your polymer clay, you would have to seal them. There is a lot of varnish and sealers that you can choose from, and my personal favorite are these two. UV resin would give your polymer clay a shiny finish like this tiny bunny brooch, and Liquitex matte varnish will give your polymer clay a matte finish. The matte varnish is almost invisible, but it does protect the color on your polymer clay. If you choose to use UV resin, then you will be needing a UV lamp or the sun. You don't always need to glaze or varnish your polymer clay. You can also buff your polymer clay. And if you want to get your clay extra shiny, then you can add some wax. You can also use your Dremel for drilling holes into your polymer clay earrings. And then you will be able to attach jewelry findings to your polymer clay. Another option to finish up your polymer clay is to sand it. You can do sanding by hand or you can use a Dremel. But make sure when you're sanding, you're adding water or you're wearing protection, because the dust that comes from sanding is really bad to breathe in. And I have a video on how to hand sand your polymer clay as well, and I will link that in the description. One other option to polish your polymer clay pieces is using car wax. Ideally, you would be doing this step as the finishing step. So after you sand and buff your piece, the piece that I'm working on right now was not sanded or buffed beforehand, so you can still see fingerprints, but the car wax did add a lot of shine. And next we have jewelry findings. So the type of jewelry findings that you want to get is really dependent on what you want to make. If you want to make earrings and you have an allergic reaction to nickel, then it's best to get earring posts or earring wire that is made fully from sterling silver. And next there are these wires. So these wires can be made into jewelry findings. So you can make your own jump rings with these wire. And next we have a binder. So this is a great way to store your leftover polymer clay. And you can see all the colors that you have. A storage box is also really handy to have when you're storing like bigger pieces, as well as your finished pieces. I also like to check on when I created these pieces so that I can see my improvement. And next, let's talk about photographing your artwork. I really like this little booth that I have for taking photos, because I can adjust the brightness and I can also take photo from the top, and there won't be any shadow because the light is coming from the top, not from the side. And then lastly, I wanted to include this app. It is an iPhone version of Lightroom and is totally free. It is super nice to use because if you only have really yellow lighting, then you can use this tool right here and you will just fill the view with like neutral color like white, and then Lightroom will automatically adjust the color based on the lighting. And this way you won't have to worry about your lighting affecting the color of your work. Thank you for watching, and hopefully this video was helpful for you.